someone to leave work early or if it's just completely unsafe and impracticable. But what you can't do is make assumptions about women, what women will be capable of or what might happen to them, how they're going to cope. I mean, I've known people who've breezed through pregnancy with absolutely no issues. Melissa Moon out running competitively when she was heavily pregnant. Silver ferns bouncing around, I've known people who've had babies when they didn't even know they were pregnant, and life continued as normal right up until. And some people will take a couple of days off and then be back at it. Other people will be at the complete opposite end of the scale. Even princesses get morning sickness and end up in the hospital. But you never know. And the person who is going to know best and first what is best for her and her unborn child is the person who's pregnant.
All right, so should employment contracts in a field like cricket just simply be the same for men and women?
Absolutely, why not?
Yeah, well, exactly. Do you gentlemen agree? Can you see any reason for having a separate set of terms for the women who play cricket for Australia and the men?
Absolutely not, no.
Okay. We have universal agreement.
It's unlawful discrimination. The thing is, if the professional athlete gets to the point where she thinks she's either too uncomfortable or sick or tired or it's unsafe for her baby or she just can't physically do the job, she's probably going to be the one to make that call. If she doesn't and the employer says, or the coach or whoever says, look, you're not really making the grade. I can't help but notice that you just happen to look like you've swallowed a watermelon. Could you be a little bit pregnant? She goes, yeah, I'm 9 months pregnant. So, well, you've slowed down a bit. Perhaps it's time to hang up your cricket bat.
It's not too hard from where you're looking. All right. Steph, thank you. Steph Dyberg on the panel. Before we go, a bunch of American actors, have got together and made a video urging the US Electoral College to stop Donald Trump becoming president. This is the Citizens for Rolling Trump. Mm-hmm. No, it's not. The best known of them, a former president himself, Martin Sheen.
As you know, our founding fathers built the Electoral College to safeguard the American people from the dangers of a demagogue and to ensure that the presidency only goes to someone who is to an eminent degree endowed with the requisite qualifications.
Okay, so to an eminent degree endowed with the requisite qualifications. Whoa.
Well, that's going to do a lot of good. Celebrities coming out in favour of Hillary Clinton got her over the line, didn't they? Also, the Electoral College was actually wrapped up in the history of slavery. It was to keep the South's numbers high, because if it was a pure franchise based on numbers, the North would always outvote the South.
Exactly.
So there's no honour in the Electoral College. They need to get rid of the Electoral College is what those celebrities should be talking about.
Except it did represent rural America as well as southern.
Good-o, it was another century. In fact, 2 centuries removed.
But this is like our Governor-General. Every so often someone sends a letter to the Governor-General saying, please don't pass that bit of legislation, or please don't give that man or woman a ministerial warrant. And of course, there's some kind of notional residual ability to do that under the royal prerogative. But if you do that, it's called a constitutional revolution. You're turning the whole thing on its head. So it's not going to happen.
A Hollywood coup. Only in America could that happen.
Team America.
Yes.
Welcome to the reality TV presidency, someone said the other day.
Oh, yeah, that's coming.
Finlay McDonald, lovely to have you on the panel again.
And all this year. Thank you very much. Happy Christmas, y'all.
Oh, thank you. And have a lovely one yourself. And you too, Duncan Webb.
Lovely to be here.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, everybody. We're back on Monday, and Checkpoint with John Campbell coming right up.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight, a special housing development in Auckland launched with great fanfare fails to meet its deadline with not a single house built in 3 years. The Social Housing Minister and Deputy Prime Minister sums up her years. She says she got on top of homelessness. One of her critics says she's got nothing to be proud of at all. A young Muslim man says the SIS asked him to spy on his own community. 3,000 people are evacuated from Aleppo. Kaikoura's inland road will be open for the first time on Monday to traffic in both directions. And hundreds of angry Coromandel locals signed a petition demanding an apology after authorities asked their harbour master to step down for using a council boat to free an orca.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. A court has ordered 4 major real estate agencies to collectively pay almost $10 million for price fixing and anti-competitive behaviour. The penalties against Barfoot and Thompson, Harcourts, LJ Hooker and Ray White were handed down in the Auckland High Court this afternoon. Carla Penman reports.
The Commerce Commission took action against the agencies after they reached a deal on how to respond to changes to Trade Me's property listing fees. The companies agreed to pass the cost of listing on the online auction site to vendors who wanted to have their properties listed on it. The judge said the case had the potential to affect a large number of transactions undertaken by ordinary people buying and selling houses. Each of the agencies reached separate settlement agreements, admitting their actions breached the Commerce Act. Ko Carla Penman tēnei.
The country's biggest Muslim body says it needs answers to whether the Security Intelligence Service is offering young people money to spy on mosques. A Muslim man in his 20s says he was called by SIS and met with them several times this year when he was asked repeatedly to become an informant in exchange for cash. The Federation of Islamic Associations in New Zealand says it has regular contact with SIS but has never been told that members of the public were being approached. Its president, Hazim Arafeh, says the Muslim community is supposed to work voluntarily with SIS, but he wouldn't approve of young people being asked to become informants. The SIS wouldn't say if paid informants were used or if young Muslims were being called. And you can hear more on this on Checkpoint after this bulletin. The government's being urged to make an emergency extension to its refugee quota to help those caught up in the Syrian crisis. Thousands of people are fleeing the city of Aleppo under great danger along fragile escape corridors. Many of them have been trapped in the sacked city for years, struggling to survive. Amnesty International's Executive Director, Grant Baildon, says the government has been doing good work advocating for the people of Syria in the Security Council, but also needs to open its doors.
The government, when it reviewed the New Zealand refugee quota, said it wanted to leave spaces aside or places for emergencies. Well, if there's not an emergency going on in the world right now, when will there be?
Amnesty International's Executive Director Grant Baildon. The US President Barack Obama says the United States will take action against Russia over the hacking of Democratic emails to benefit the Trump campaign. In an interview with National Public Radio, the Democratic outgoing president says there's no doubt that when any foreign government tries to impact the integrity of the American elections, we need to take action, and we will. Mr. Obama says it will happen at a time and a place of America's own choosing. He says some of it may be explicit and publicised, and some of it may not be. He says his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, is well aware of his feelings about this because he spoke to him directly about it. The police have seized more than 500 cannabis plants in a drug bust at 6 properties in Auckland. Detective Senior Sergeant Kevin Tiernan says some of the houses were in Howick and Papakura were valued at $1.2 million and they were rented out at $800 a week. He says police are investigating several lines of inquiry, including contacting the landlords of the 5 rental properties, trying to ascertain whether they knew about the operation.
Landlords is just one further inquiry that we have to do. There are other things, bank inquiries and phone inquiries and interviewing neighbours and other things, following up on cars that have been seen coming and going to various addresses. So there's quite a number of further inquiries that have to be done.
Detective Senior Sergeant Kevin Tiernan says 2 men and a woman have been charged with cultivating cannabis. The Corrections Minister says she has been assured that placing out-of-town prison officers working at Mount Eden Prison in a 4.5-star Auckland hotel is the most cost-effective option. The Corrections Department has spent $2 million over 18 months housing staff in central Auckland hotels since it took over the jail from the private operator Serco amid the Fight Club scandal. The Minister, Judith Collins, declined to be interviewed, but in a statement said the department had assured her it had explored numerous accommodation options and this was the most appropriate. It's 5:04. In sport, it's a new broom for the Black Caps. Almost 7 years since playing his last one-day game for New Zealand, Otago batsman Neil Broom has been recalled to the side for the 3-match series against Bangladesh, starting in Christchurch on Boxing Day. Broom has given up the second year of a contract with English county Derbyshire to resurrect his international career. He says things have changed since he played the last of his 22 one-day internationals.
33 now, play a bit of cricket and, got a family and some kids, and it doesn't feel like the be-all and end-all, so, it's just a game of cricket, isn't it? And I won't be putting too much pressure on myself, just think about it as going out there and playing for Otago.
Neil Broom. Wicketkeeper Luke Ronke has also been recalled to the squad. Meanwhile, day 2 of the first test between Australia and Pakistan in Brisbane has begun, with the visitors capturing the valuable wicket of Steve Smith for 130. The hosts are 323 for 4. Team New Zealand has signed 5 times America's Cup winner Murray Jones to help guide sailors in the last 6 months before next year's event in Bermuda. Jones, who won the Old Mug with Team New Zealand in 1995 and 2000, was identified as one of the key figures behind Oracle Team USA's comeback victory in 2013. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Country Life visits Landcorp's Rangitaiki station. 9,000 hectares of beef, sheep, deer and dairy farming. That's a lot of farming. And down the road in Martin, there's the 17-year-old twins, Rudy and Oscar Ballister, pedalling from Auckland to Wellington, raising money for the Mental Health Foundation, which will go nicely with a sonic tonic dedicated to cycling. On Nights, where the rubber meets the radio. After the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow for all of the North Island. Fine, apart from cloudy areas in the west tomorrow, mainly morning and evening. For Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine today and tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, cloudy periods with isolated showers until tomorrow morning, cloud increasing tomorrow evening. Fiordland, cloud at times with a few showers, turning to rain tomorrow night. Southland and Otago, fine spells with isolated showers this afternoon. Cloud increasing later tomorrow, westerly gales about coastal Southland and Clutha until tonight. And the Chatham Islands, occasional showers, southwest gales tomorrow morning. It's just gone 5:07 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you, Katrina. Coming up on the program, Aleppo today and over the past 6 years. In Kaikoura, roads are opening and improving. It's very welcome news, and we have a pretty striking description of the remarkable changes to its coastline. All of that and more over the next hour and a half. But first, throughout this week, we've looked at emergency housing, the ambulance to the bottom of the cliff and away. Next stop, homelessness. WINZ pays for much of it, often at considerable expense. In one case, revealed on Checkpoint on Tuesday, $2,300 a week for a very basic one-bedroom unit. In other cases, revealed on Checkpoint as far back as May, $1,300 and $1,400 a week, once again for accommodation vastly inferior to what you'd get on the long-term rental market for considerably less than that. The issue is affordable longer-term accommodation, and the shortage is so great that WINZ finds itself coping with that shortage. Social Housing Minister Paula Bennett, who has declined an invitation to appear on our program every single day this week, including today, did find the time to appear on the Paul Henry program this morning. This was a question and answer from that appearance.
Paula, same question to you. Your favourite individual political moment of 2016?
My own. Certainly getting on top of the homelessness. I've got more people out of cars into homes. It's been really what's been driving me this year.
Paula Bennett, we've tried for months to get numbers on that, and no one has been able to provide an answer. How many homeless people have been placed in homes? And setting aside emergency accommodation, which is expensive and temporary, although obviously welcome, how many of these people have been placed in long-term accommodation? No one will answer that. And this week, from the Minister to the ministries, we have been turned down for interviews every day. No one has fronted. So in the face of the silence, what does Labour's social development spokesperson make of Paula Bennett's assessment of herself? Here's CARMEL SEPULONI.
I think that is an outrageous comment, and the hypocrisy when we look at that minister and what she's done while she's been in the job, but the opportunities that she accessed prior to being in this job should offend most New Zealanders. I mean, she got a Housing Corp grant to help her buy her first home, and now here she is as the social housing minister, and she's been part of selling off 2,500 houses. And she's overseen a huge increase in homelessness. I mean, we're at 41,000 homeless people in New Zealand. So I don't think she's got anything to be proud of.
That's CARMEL SEPULONI. The issue appears to be the shortage of long-term affordable housing. And earlier this week, one of our Facebook viewers, Waina Emery, took us to a street in Manurewa where up to a dozen Housing New Zealand houses have been empty for almost a year. Tonight we can reveal that whilst those homes have been empty for months, resource consent to do anything with them is yet to be granted. We can also reveal tonight on Checkpoint that in New LYNN, where a special housing area was launched with great fanfare 3 years ago, not a single house has been built in that area. Zach Fleming explains.
The first homes in a special housing area in Auckland's New LYNN were supposed to be ready this month, but none have been built. Only foundations for a small number have been laid. The site was one of 11 special housing areas announced by Housing Minister Nick Smith and then Auckland Mayor Len Brown in December 2013, and was hailed as real progress towards solving the housing crisis. Special housing areas allow fast-tracked consenting in return for a percentage of affordable homes. The area here in New LYNN is made up of 2,000 private houses on Clinker Place and around 150 state houses in nearby Tom Street. Part of the nearly 14-hectare site included replacing state homes on Tom Street with higher density options. But when Checkpoint visited yesterday, the original state homes were only just starting to be demolished. In fact, Housing New Zealand had only called for registrations for the new development's design 2 days ago. Green Party co-leader and housing spokesperson METIRIA TUREI says it's not good enough.
It's appalling that government is allowing existing homes that people can live in right now to be demolished without any genuine plan to replace those homes. There is a serious housing crisis, particularly in Auckland. Families are desperate for a decent place to live, and the government is now overseeing the demolition of homes.
3 years on, none of the promised private homes on Clinker Place have been built either. Documents reveal several setbacks have beset the site, including squabbles over the unitary plan and the need for a new stormwater pipeline. Ms TUREI says special housing areas aren't working.
The special housing areas policy, it's not just a failure, it's a have. It's been government's way of duping Aucklanders into thinking that government's doing something with their housing. They're not. These houses are not being built. The government keeps making promises that they can't keep.
The site's current developer, Evander Limited, refused to speak to Checkpoint, but in a statement last year said the first homes would be ready by December 2016. Auckland Council and Housing New Zealand both declined to provide a timeline for when homes will be completed. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
Yes, we tried to speak to people about Zach's story. We tried to speak to people about the emergency housing and the high cost of it. We tried to speak to people about the quantity, the number of people who've been transferred from sleeping in cars to sleeping in some kind of permanent home. And once again, as has happened every day this week, the answer from everyone was a flat refusal to front for Checkpoint. It's 30 minutes past 5. A young Muslim says the Security Intelligence Service, the SIS, asked him to spy on his community in exchange for money, prompting a please explain from Islamic groups. The man in his 20s says he feels harassed and constantly under watch after turning down several offers to become an informant for New Zealand's spy agency, the SIS. Mohammed Hassan reports.
Adam is of Middle Eastern descent. He's a Muslim who was born in New Zealand. He sees himself as a part of his community, helps out every now and then, attends the mosque. One day, he got an unexpected call. We've changed his name and voice to protect his privacy.
I got a phone call from them. They identified themselves as the intelligence services and they told me that you're not in trouble, but we want to talk to you about your experiences overseas. So we made a time and place and I met with them in a cafe.
There were two men. They showed him their badges and started asking him questions. Simple ones at first, about his life, his community, anything he was worried about. He met with them 4 or 5 times over the last year, and soon they were asking him to do things, including collecting information from certain places like his mosque on a regular basis. They also said he could be paid, under the table, if he agreed.
when they offered me job offers, like, I sort of didn't turn it down. I sort of like dragged it on, which I think maybe if I was abrupt and straightforward with them and sort of shut it down straight away, it would have just been left there and there. I said no to them for several of the job offers that they made, but towards the end, like, I got the impression that they were sort of starting to harass me.
The SIS staffers asked him again on several occasions. He kept saying no, and then suddenly they stopped calling. Now he's been left uncertain about whether SIS is still keeping tabs on him.
I always will assume that I'm being monitored. To be honest with you, I don't think I'm the only Muslim as well who has that.
Do you think there are other people in the community they would have approached, that they would have been trying to get?
No doubt in my mind. Absolutely. To spy on the Muslim community, yeah, absolutely. They've got informants in the Muslim community, they're watching.
Other community leaders, including the AUT chaplain and a youth worker in the Mount Roskill area, told RNZ they'd heard similar stories. They say young people, usually in their early 20s, have complained to them that SIS is calling repeatedly or showing up at their homes asking for information. The director of SIS, Rebecca Kitteridge, wasn't available for an interview, but in a statement the agency says it doesn't comment on specific cases, individuals or methods. It says a number of agencies, including the SIS, work closely with communities to build partnerships and ensure open and constructive dialogue. When pressed about their use of informants and if they are paid, the SIS wouldn't respond. The Federation of Islamic Associations of New Zealand says it would be troubling if young people were being offered money to spy. Its president, Hazem Arafah, says while he has regular contact with SIS, he's never been told that members of the public are being approached.
New Zealand Muslim community is supposed to work voluntarily with NZSIS. We do our role in safeguarding the wider New Zealand society. I've never been told in the past that they have communication with members of the community. It won't be something that we would approve at all.
Mr. Arafah says he now wants answers from the SIS about the tactics they're using in his community. For Checkpoint, Muhammad Hassan.
And you can hear more from that interview in the final episode of Muhammad's podcast, Public Enemy, which airs at 11:30 on Sunday morning. And the rest of the series, which has already gone to air, is available on the RNZ website. Coming up on Checkpoint, Kokoda's Inland Road will be open for the first time on Monday to traffic travelling in both directions. Very welcome news. And hundreds of angry Coromandel locals sign a petition demanding an apology from authorities after their harbour master is stood down for using a council boat to free an orca. Much more coming up. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, and we are, of course, on Facebook. Our Facebook site is getting lots of visits. Thank you for checking it out. It's 5:17. Let's go now to Aleppo. Some 3,000 people, including hundreds of children, have been evacuated in the first convoys leaving the last rebel enclave in the Syrian city. The Red Cross says a third convoy is now taking more people out of the city towards opposition territory, most of them heading towards the rebel-controlled province of Idlib. The BBC's Quentin Somerville reports.
In Aleppo, here was a fight that tore a city apart and split a nation. Today, this battle ended with a convoy of white flags, and cautiously, eastern Aleppo began to empty. In their thousands, rebel fighters, the sick and the injured were transported away. Nearby, government supporters rejoiced. They praised God, Syria, and Bashar al-Assad. The most desperate were the first to leave. The fear and the anxiety showed. Their rebellion is over, but before they reached relative safety, there was one final journey across enemy lines. The ambulances didn't get far.
As they prepared to evacuate civilians from besieged Aleppo, the ambulance convoy was shot by the regime forces. We're having to move so that we don't get shelled or bombed.
And then panic. As Syrian government jets flew overhead, people feared an attack. Hope is precarious here. The ceasefire had already collapsed once, but more buses set off and made it through. In the rebel-held countryside, on arrival they chanted, "Aleppo, we will be back."
The road was full of Russians, Iranians and Hezbollah fighters. There was no Syrian army at all. We left with honour and dignity. Aleppo was completely burned. Yesterday they bombed us with all kinds of weapons.
Here there was relief. Young and old, almost 3,000 made it out. Among them, rebel fighters, their defeat all too apparent. You can't call this peace, but Aleppo was calm today. The city has fallen around them. Rebel commanders say it's defeat, but not surrender, and that their opposition will continue far from here. And this is where the displaced will go, to rebel-held Idlib, where in already overstretched camps, they're promising to make room.
When we heard that our trapped brothers in Aleppo were going to leave, we had a meeting, and because we don't have spare tents, we asked families to share so we could provide tents to our brothers from Aleppo. There are families and children.
And what remains of East Aleppo? Tens of thousands of people. It will take weeks of convoys to release them. The victory broke Aleppo. It remains a city, but divided, much like the rest of Syria. Before they left, the rebels set alight their headquarters and fuel supplies. And once more, Aleppo burned.
Quentin Somerville from the BBC. That part of Aleppo is now a scene of utter destruction, as Quentin said. An ancient, celebrated, special city reduced to rubble and smoking ruins. And the dreams of those who hoped Syrian democracy might spread from there utterly dashed, as you heard. Those dreams really took flight in Syria in 2010 and in Aleppo itself 2 years after that. And they truly ended this week. As this resident described, and it was posted on Twitter, as he sat in a window above one of the last streets to fall to those government forces. For 6 years, he is saying, we had a revolution demanding freedom. We demanded a free democratic country, a country that doesn't glorify anyone, free Syria. We demanded to overthrow Assad. We don't want Assad. We want free Syria. In the end, they lost Aleppo, they lost the dream of freedom, and they've kept Assad. Assad himself, suited like a merchant banker and looking utterly untroubled, this morning declared the victory not just a liberation, but history being made. To the victor, the spin. Aleppo was always unlikely. Assad's crackdown on the Arab Spring and on the Syrian pro-democracy movement that refused to be silenced became more and more brutal. By the middle of 2012, the country was in a form of civil war, and Aleppo increasingly became a stronghold of the uprising, complicated by the profoundly inconsistent objectives of the combatants. Some were pro-democracy, others were jihadists and Islamic extremists. Perhaps all that some of them had in common was the ancient proverb, "My enemy's enemy is my friend." But these complexities were largely submerged beneath the viciousness of Assad's repression. As the BBC reported in a series of reports beginning at the end of 2012, if Aleppo symbolised hope for something better, Assad wasn't having any of it.
We joined a convoy on a highly dangerous mission to Aleppo, where the insurgency has found its loudest voice. And the battle is at its most fierce. They've been celebrating victory in parts of Aleppo city. It's certainly premature, but rebels and residents say they've reason to cheer. This hospital's been shelled 12 times. There are few facilities left now to treat the living. And with the threat of attack, the entire hospital has moved down to the foyer. The situation inside here is one of unbelievable chaos. We've just been here for a very brief time, and every few minutes, new patients are brought in as the doctors work under fire to try and keep them alive.
That was the end of 2012. Uprising, repression, and the changing tone continued into the next year.
In the last few weeks, rebel fighters have made key gains here in the north. Towns, military bases, airfields.
He's now just a few hundred metres away from
the airport, I can actually see the airstrip there and the main airport buildings. If they take this, not only will it have been a strategic success, but also an important symbolic victory.
Victory. That word was still being used in 2013, but not by the next year.
After her husband was killed by a sniper, Mariam Akash and her 9 children moved into a half-built house.
We're just living on the edge of life. We're always nervous. We're always afraid.
The government insists it's protecting people, targeting terrorists based in residential areas. But often it's civilians who are hit.
We heard the first blast, and I asked my husband to go and get the kids off the street, and suddenly it hit us. It was like someone picked me up and threw me inside.
And then this year, nothing but loss.
This is what Aleppo looks like in the wake of battle. The Syrian army now has the upper hand. The rebels are in retreat.
This was close to the front line in the old city, a tangle of medieval alleys that used to be the greatest souk in the Levant. Aleppo's old city was an extraordinary human creation. Now it is empty and dead.
Zainab is 10 days old. She's almost as old as this offensive against eastern Aleppo, born into the heat of the war, now living here in the freezing cold of winter in such a bleak place to start life.
Over 4 years, Aleppo's uprising was defeated so utterly, only 2 possibilities remained: evacuation or death. And the West, watching ineffectually, well, once again, John Kerry was laying blame, describing a thing the West was unable to stop.
And the Assad regime is aiding and abetting. And the Assad regime is actually carrying out nothing short of a massacre. And we have witnessed indiscriminate slaughter, not accidents of war, not collateral damage, but frankly purposeful, a cynical policy of terrorizing civilians.
John Kerry ending that report. It's 27 minutes past 5. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint on RNZ National. Hundreds of angry Coromandel locals have signed a petition demanding an apology from authorities after their harbour master was stood down for using a council boat to free an orca. And they have criticised the Department of Conservation's poor response to the killer whale's plight after it was tangled in crayfish pot ropes at Kennedy Bay for at least 16 hours. Sharon Brett Kelly reports.
When the urgent plea to free the trapped orca was posted on the local Facebook page, Whitianga Harbour Master Matthew Collicott and water taxi operator Hayden Smith were among those who leapt into action. They headed out to Tokoroa Rock at 1 o'clock yesterday morning as experts warned it may not survive the night.
Had a bit of rope which we attached to a crowbar actually, and then we could drop the crowbar down, hook the line and pull it to the surface, and we pulled the whale to the surface as well. And yeah, we could see the knot and cut it from there.
Hayden Smith says it took just 5 minutes to cut the whale free. Now the rescuers are being hailed as local heroes.
I don't know. Yeah, it was a pretty hard case really. The kind of hype that's created, we were just trying to help out really, and yeah, we kind of had the skills and the resources there, and we thought, oh, well, we may as well give it a go.
But Matthew Collicott was stood down as harbour master yesterday for using the council boat for the rescue. He had already handed in his resignation, and today was to have been his last day in the job. Whitianga local Ian Stewart says people are furious that Mr Collicott is being punished, not rewarded.
Why the Waikato Regional Council would then turn around and suspend Matt from his job for doing that is beyond belief. It's a sign where rules and regulations are overtaking New Zealand values.
Avon Hansford runs boat cruises in the area.
It's a knee-jerk reaction and inexcusable behaviour from his bosses. There's not a lot of these animals left around the place, and to see something in danger and of dying and to not want to help it because of paperwork is just inexcusable.
Locals are also critical of the Department of Conservation for its slow response. Gail Thwaites called DOC's hotline 3 times on Wednesday after her son Peter, a fisherman, said he saw the troubled orca calling to its pod in distress.
The woman in Whitianga said that it was too rough for them to go out, and I just thought, well, that poor fish is going to die, and so by that stage, as I say, I had a gutful, so I hung up in it.
Janine Stewart, who posted the urgent call for a rescue party on the Whitianga Facebook page, says the orca would have died without the local community rallying to help.
I would have never believed putting a post up hoping to get some help would have resulted in this. And, at the end of the day, it's about realising that the outcome was achieved, the orca was freed, it's off with its pod happily. All this other stuff that's happening is just unneeded drama and bureaucracy as far as I'm concerned.
The council's chief executive, Vaughan Payne, says the council knew nothing about the whale until after the rescue. He says Matthew Collicott should have asked permission to take out the boat, but he is not being punished.
Asking him not to undertake operational duties and to stay in the office and look after himself, I think, was my responsibility. And secondly, we needed to undertake an inquiry because we need to check whether or not there are any breaches of relevant laws that we're responsible for.
DOC says it is investigating all the circumstances of the incident, including its own response time. It says trained staff who might have been able to deal with the orca were busy, and an attempt to get to the whale in the afternoon was thwarted by rough seas. Mō te hotaka o te ahiahi, ko Sharon Brett Kelly, aho.
Coming up, some pretty striking breaking news, which we'll confirm before we bring it to you, because that's the kind of news organisation that we are. In fact, the High Court has approved the Southern Response class action. Now, if you're wondering what the hell that means, in Christchurch, the Southern Response court actions were separated, person by person, claimant by claimant. And a whole lot of people got together and said, no, we want to take a class action because we think there is consistent behaviour and there is one case to answer. At first, that was declined. They appealed to the High Court. That has just been accepted. We've heard by email that is a pretty big victory for those people, and we will report on it. We've also got Nona standing by for our last business chat of the year, Nona, and Katrina Batten with the RNZ headlines as always.
The High Court in Auckland has ordered 4 major real estate agencies to pay almost $10 million for price fixing and anti-competitive behaviour. The Commerce Commission took action against Barfoot and Thompson, Harcourts, LJ Hooker and Ray White after they reached a deal on how to respond to changes to Trade Me's property listing fees. The companies have agreed to pass on the cost of listings on the online auction site to vendors. The country's biggest Muslim body says it needs answers to whether the Security Intelligence Service is offering young people money to spy on mosques. A Muslim man in his 20s says he was called by the SIS and met with them several times this year when he was asked repeatedly to become an informant in exchange for cash. The Federation of Islamic Associations in New Zealand says it has regular contact with the SIS but has never been told that members of the public were being approached. The government's being urged to make an emergency extension to its refugee quota to help those caught up in the Syrian crisis. Thousands of people are fleeing the city of Aleppo under great danger along fragile escape corridors. Amnesty International's Executive Director Grant Baildon says the government has been doing good work advocating for the people of Syria in the Security Council, but also needs to open its doors. The Corrections Minister Judith Collins says she has been assured that placing out-of-town prison officers working at Mount Eden Prison in a 4.5-star Auckland hotel is the most cost-effective option. The Corrections Department has spent $2 million over 18 months housing staff in central Auckland hotels since it took over the jail from the private operator Serco amid the Fight Club scandal. The police have seized more than 500 cannabis plants in a drug bust at 6 properties in Auckland. They say some of the houses in Howick and Papakura were valued at $1.2 million and were rented out at $800 a week. 2 men and a woman have been charged with cultivating cannabis. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
I'm just tweeting because I think this is big, Katrina Batten. Breaking news, Southern Response policyholders can take a class action against them. We'll explain on Checkpoint shortly, and I'm just going to send that tweet out because I want people who are interested in that to turn in and listen. Gone. How 21st century is that?
I tell you, that's amazing. You do it all, don't you, John? I mean, everything.
Yeah.
Oh, like you're a juggler.
Well, no, from time to time I do two things at once.
All right.
Not like you, Nona Peltier, sitting here with 411 pages in front of you.
That's true. I do. I have a lot of pages here. Well, there's a lot to talk about.
I want to say, Nona, because this is our last business chat of the year because Giles is on next week, what a pleasure it is having you in the studio, making business three-dimensional, interesting, human. Fantastic. Whenever you're with us, it's a joy. No,
oh, that's such a lovely thing to say.
Right, how are we going to end the year? What are we talking about?
Well, we're going to talk about oil and gas. Why not? I mean, we've been talking about oil and gas most of the year, so let's just talk about it now. And that's because today there was a special shareholder meeting in Wellington. New Zealand Oil and Gas asked their shareholders whether or not they would approve that deal where they're selling the Kupe field to Genesis Energy. And Genesis was offering quite a good price, $168 million, I believe, from memory. Yeah, that's right. A big, huge number.
Yeah, that's a lot of money.
And more than the value is to New Zealand Oil and Gas as a stake onto themselves. So Genesis owning a larger share of that field is worth more to Genesis, so they paid a premium. And the shareholders took out the offer, and while for Christmas, guess what? Well, not for Christmas, but in their stocking coming up by May is going to be $100 million in cash back to shareholders.
So what did the New Zealand Oil and Gas share price do today?
Actually, not very much,
right.
Because it was fully priced in.
Okay.
It was kind of assumed that they would take it. So what happened was the share price only rose, actually 3%, but that's only 2 cents to 63 cents a share. Now, it's interesting because one of our leading analysts in New Zealand, Forsyth Barr, was very quick to sort of evaluate the deal and see where it sits. And they're saying, well, you know what? New Zealand and oil and gas would be worth more per share. They say it would be worth somewhat like 76 cents a share if they just cashed up the whole lot. Yeah, as opposed to keeping it. They said that if they kept it, it would only be worth 66 cents.
Right, so basically if they liquefied themselves.
Yes, that's right. And just put the cash all together and liquidated their company, it'd be worth more a share.
They've been constantly involved in a process of reinvention for decades now, New Zealand Oil and Gas. They're a really interesting company. They were significant shareholders, lest we forget, in Pike River. And we all know what a disaster that investment was, and lots of questions about shortcuts and cutting corners and
interestingly though, I spoke with their new chief executive who was confirmed today. That's Andrew Jeffries. Interesting. We've talked to him a few times recently over a number of different issues, and they're looking to take the money that they have in the bank and buy fresh assets and go again. They're quite confident that oil prices are going to recover and that the assets right now, there's a lot of them in New Zealand. So for example, both Shell and Origin Energy are looking to sell up their portfolios. They're thinking, well, we've got loads of cash. Yeah. Let's go shopping. Yeah. So, and he said that they expected to make some good deals within a year. So let's wait and see. But I don't think there's any appetite for New Zealand Oil and Gas to liquidate all their assets like Forsyth Barr was suggesting. So yeah, it'll be a really interesting year for New Zealand oil and gas. Gas prices, oil prices generally have improved a bit since the OPEC and non-OPEC nations came up with some kind of deal. However, there's still a glut of oil out there. So now the whole conversation turns to Donald Trump. What's he going to do?
Let's talk about the year, because I think for me, listening to you speak during the year, it was how often the markets were confounded by democracy, whether we liked the democracy or not. And the two classic examples, of course, were Brexit and Donald Trump. And so the market, and you were just talking about the fact the market constantly prices in expectations. It tries to know in advance what's going to happen and price things accordingly. It got Brexit so wrong that it ambushed itself.
Well, I think it was the bookies that got it wrong.
Yeah.
I think the punters, in fact, the poll showed right up until the end that it was very, very close and that the margin of error pointed could go either way. It's just that, some people with big pockets put bets on the opposite, on what wasn't the winner.
Absolutely.
So some people took a big bath there, didn't they?
And through all of this, New Zealand has remained I mean, what did David Longy, call the New Zealand reef fishing?
The reef fish.
Yeah, and little bits of driftwood tossed around on big seas.
Yeah.
But we've remained reasonably
steady.
Steady.
And even now, our dollar, it fell a bit after the U.S. Federal Reserve hiked interest rates this week. After it took a whole year for them to get to that. Anyway, so the New Zealand dollar was 72 cents at the beginning of the week. Now it's 70.3, which is pretty good because the U.S. dollar is at a 14-year high. And, it probably will stay there because of the inflation pressures. And we're looking at an interest rate hike of maybe 3% by 2019. Anyway, that will be enough, I'm sure, to keep the market happy.
Yeah, well.
So what do we got? 70.3 US cents, 95.4 Australian, 56.6 pence. That was where our dollar ended the week. And our top 50 index was really little changed. Some of the emerging markets in Asia have taken a bit of a hiding with the shift of the dollars back into the U.S. economy there. So we ended up 12 points, not very much, to 6,760.
Thanks, Nona. Congratulations on a fantastic year.
And
It's a
you,
pleasure
John.
working with you. Happy Christmas.
Oh, thank you, and you too, and
Thanks.
everybody and all our listeners as well.
Thank you, Nona. We're just rejigging the show a bit so we can tell you what's going on with Southern Response. Let's go to the Commerce Commission now. 4 major real estate agencies have been ordered to pay nearly $10 million for price fixing and anti-competitive behaviour. The penalties were handed down to Barfoot and Thompson, Harcourts, LJ Hooker and Ray White in the High Court in Auckland today. The Commerce Commission took action against the firms after they reached a deal on how to respond to changes to TradeMe's property listing fees. I asked Commerce Commission Principal Counsel David BLACKTOP to explain what was going on.
Essentially what they did is that in August 2013, TradeMe, you might recall, increased its prices or changed the way it priced. So it removed what was previously a cap on the amount the real estate agencies paid. And the agencies were naturally concerned about that. They saw their costs potentially going up. And what they did essentially is get in a room together and agree that they would pass that cost on to vendors rather than incurring it themselves.
And that they would do so without disclosing that was going on and that they were working together in this fashion?
There's certainly no indication that they had told their vendors that this is what had happened.
OK. So why did you take the prosecution? What was it that was most egregious to you?
Well, we think that price-fixing conduct is inimical to the competitive nature of New Zealand markets. So competition drives benefits for consumers. And what happened here was that the agencies reached an agreement that removed the risk about, removed the need for them to think about what their competitors were going to do with this cost. And that removed that competitive tension, and that can have detriments for consumers.
Absolutely. And the very basis of the market is that competition creates, hopefully, cheaper prices, right? That's the theory.
Yes, exactly right.
So can we talk to the judge's point that they weren't trying to break the law, but in fact, the net effect was that the law was being broken, was it?
Yeah, that's essentially what happened here, John. So they tried to respond to TradeMe's increase in prices by developing their own website, realestate.co.nz, and investing money in that and trying to build that. The error of what they did here, though, was to go that extra step and try and pass on the cost to the vendors. Now, the reason that the judge said and the Commission accepts that they didn't set out to intentionally breach the Act is they did get legal advice about whether there was any obstacle to what they were trying to do. And that legal advice came back and said, no, there is no legal obstacle. And so essentially what that meant was the Commission accepted that these guys weren't out to deliberately breach the Act, but as you say, that's effectively what happened nonetheless.
Right. And so they didn't set out to deliberately breach the Act, but in fact the Act was breached, hence a total of $10 million in fines. Where does that stand in terms of the kind of work you've done and the kind of sentences that have been handed down?
It's up there in terms of a global number. As I said, it's spread across all of those agencies. So if you look at the numbers for the individual agencies, they're sort of in the mid-$2 million ranges each, which by our standards is sort of in the middle of the range we get from individual companies. So certainly it's a big number when you add it up, but the individual fines are sort of in the middle of where we would get fines for this type of conduct.
That is the Commerce Commission talking about, as you heard, a pretty big victory, $10 million in total. Breaking news. The High Court has approved Southern Response class action to proceed. Now, I'm ad-libbing all of this, but I know the story well, so forgive me if I'm not quite precise. But Southern Response, of course, their clients tried to take a class action. At first, that was ruled out because the test was, what was the commonality? You can't have a class action if you were just a disparate get-together. You actually have to have a central spine that binds you. Well, now the High Court has said there is one, that they can, all of these claimants can act against Southern Response together, meaning they don't all have separate lawyers' fees. They can unite in a class action. A court-sanctioned opt-in order has also been granted, allowing other Southern Response policyholders who might have been tentative about participating in this appeal until 16 April 2017 to join the class action if they wish. I think we've got Brian Kinder on the phone. Brian, are you there?
Yes, I am, John, yes.
Brian, we have spoken before, and you are one of the class action claimants, aren't you?
That's correct, and a very happy one too, John.
So when did you find out?
I found out by someone that rang me from Radio New Zealand about 2 minutes ago, and I am incredibly excited, and it's just wonderful news. We can't be happier.
Yeah. Can you... I mean, you either know the story or you don't, so apologies if we're telling people stuff we already know, but you were insured with AMI, right?
That's correct, John.
And then AMI kind of set aside its Christchurch earthquake exposure because it simply couldn't meet it, and the government picked it up in the form of Southern Response. That's right, isn't it?
That's correct, John, yeah.
Okay, you then found yourself in just a nightmare of litigation, claim, counterclaim, back and forth, just endlessly.
Well, we've kind of been living a promise from Southern Response for about almost 5 years, and then we come across Grant Cameron, who has really got things going for us. But basically, Southern Response have just been categorically refusing to settle us all the way through. We've spent countless hours on it, and there's been countless tears at home. I mean, these people just do not know what they do to family life. They just are absolutely heartless.
Yeah, and I've spoken to lots of these people, and they say that thing. Is the impact that profound?
It's very profound. You start living this every day because you're just not getting anywhere with them. You try and settle. You've got an insurance policy, and believe you me, the very last thing I'd want to enter into with the government is an insurance policy. So we had a private insurer, and by default, we ended up with the government. And a whole lot of people who knew nothing at all about insurance, who are pretending they know about building. They're pretending they know about project management. Most of them come off. Well, I've got to be diplomatic here, John, I suppose, but the good people probably have jobs, and these people came into Southern Response. A lot of them.
I understand where this is coming from, and it's coming from a profound sense of frustration. Were you September or February, your damage?
Well, our big damage was in February.
Okay, so we're what, 5 3/4 years, aren't we?
That's right, John.
Of limbo, of uncertainty, of toing and froing, and now you get your day in court, and you won't be alone.
That's right, John. Yeah, incredibly excited about that opportunity, and I'm sure Grant and the rest of his team are too. They've been working incredibly hard, and they just come up against absolute stone wall of it really is the classic delay, deny, defend. It really is. In fact, it's criminal what they're doing in New Zealand.
Brian Kinder, thank you for joining us, Brian. Brian has just got the news Brian has just got the news, and we really appreciate Brian talking to us. Brian is one of the class action claimants. So previously they were told they couldn't take a class action, that whilst they all had the same insurer and they all had grievances with the same insurer and they all felt, like Brian felt about Southern Response, that alone wasn't a form of commonality. That wasn't the connection required in law for a class action. Grant Cameron has been taking this case. And Grant, are you there on the phone now?
Yes, I am. How are you, John?
Yeah, well, probably not as good as you, Grant. This is a triumph for you, isn't it?
Well, it's been a very prolonged process, and we're very happy that the courts have accepted that this type of case can proceed.
So what is the spine? That's the word we're looking for, isn't it? What is the spine the court found that binds these cases, other than the fact they're all against Southern Response?
Well, basically, the courts accepted that the argument put forward, the allegation is that Southern Response engaged in a deliberate strategy designed to deceive policyholders and delay claims with a view to reducing the financial liability that it had to its policyholders. So the court's not determining that as a matter of fact as...
No, that's not, and that's important we stress that. This is now the right to take a class action, isn't it?
That's right. It's the right to come before the court and argue that allegation through.
Yeah. Can we back up the truck a bit here, Grant? And you and I have spoken about this an enormous amount, and you've spoken to Pip, our executive producer, and lots of people on Checkpoint. But remind us why you had to go to the High Court. Who had declined the right to a class action prior to now?
There was an application made late last year to effectively get the court sanction for what's called in New Zealand a representative action. I think commonly we refer to them publicly as class action. That was rejected because the judge at the time felt there was not sufficient commonality, and the insurer was vigorously arguing that the damage with individual homes was quite different, so therefore they should be maintained as individual cases. The practical problem is that if you carry on as individual cases, people can't afford the cost of litigation. So by bringing them together, getting a litigation funder, you can actually fund the case forward, and you can then get a common approach, if you like, and the court can look at the thing as a whole. So that's the real reason we wanted to persist. It was knocked back in February, but the judge expressly reserved the right for us to bring a reformulated claim.
Yeah, absolutely.
And here we are.
And you've won.
Yes.
We have to be careful because I don't want to defame anyone, and also we don't want to read the tea leaves more than the facts support. But the issue around civil action like this is that people do drop out, that there is a high attrition rate because people simply can't afford to take this kind of legal action.
That's exactly right.
And so do we have to look at situations whereby people who en masse are suing the same person or the same organisation have greater rights to class action recourse?
I think that is certainly the trend around the world, and I think the Supreme Court has also given pretty clear direction in a decision in a Credit Suisse case where access to justice has to be the sort of dominant consideration. The difficulty is that we don't yet have class action rules in this country. They have been drafted, but they've been sitting really in a parliamentary process since about 2004. And therefore we're using High Court rules which weren't really intended to cover this type of proceeding. So the courts have been able to stretch and massage things, as it were, and I think the gate is now open, and I think also that the judiciary are coming to terms with what class actions can really mean.
Absolutely. Okay. People who haven't joined the class action so far but would like to have until 16 April 2017 to join in, you're expecting that people will?
Yes, we had originally well over 400 inquiries. A lot of people sat on the fence to see whether this was actually going to be going ahead. Now they know. I'm expecting a lot of calls.
And one final question. Southern Response, we've got a response, which I will read out in a sec. They say the High Court ruled by a rather fine margin, a verbatim quote from Southern Response. Can you explain that to me, Grant?
Well, I think that comes down again to the High Court rule and the nature of this question of commonality. And so, on balance, the Judge, Justice Gendel, felt that this matter should proceed in this fashion. And we do think, as the Supreme Court's once commented before, that it's really all a matter of case management, really.
There's been some unpleasant things said about your tenacity in this respect. A couple of people have, said that you are stirring the pot in an unnecessary way. You would regard this as personal vindication, wouldn't you, Grant?
Well, I guess in a passing way, but let's say over the years we've done 15 or 16 successful class actions, and there are all those sort of comments that will be made, but they've all been successful.
Grant Cameron, who is the solicitor, the lawyer from GCA Lawyers, who has taken this case and won the right now to go forward with this class action. What does Southern Response say? Well, they say the High Court ruled by a rather fine margin that the revised claim by the Southern Response Unresolved Claims Group is sufficient to allow the group to proceed with this class action. I'm reading verbatim stuff now. Southern Response is disappointed with the proposed process. It's concerned that a representative action based on what the court described as a reasonably tenuous claim will not efficiently and fairly resolve each customer's individual earthquake claim. Southern Response believes that the amendments to the claim made to allow a representative action have no basis. The court said that it reached its decision by a rather fine margin. The court also indicated that the resolution of group members' individual insurance claims will now likely be postponed until after the group's revised group claim is dealt with. This is likely to delay the resolution of individual claims of group members. As a result, Southern Response is considering its options, including an appeal. Remember, Southern Response, of course, is a government insurance company now. They picked up AMI's insurance policies in Christchurch because AMI was simply unable to pay them. It's 5:05. That was breaking news. Thank you to both Grant Cameron and Brian Kinder for calling us, and to Southern Response for their very quick statement. Let's go to the Brazilian soccer team that died in that plane crash. The last surviving player has left hospital in Colombia almost 3 weeks after the plane crash claimed the lives of most of his teammates. Defender Helion Neto woke from coma last week with no memory of the accident, and doctors had initially decided to withhold information about the crash while he was trying to recover so that he could cope with such an emotional shock. Here's Graham Mackay.
Wheeled out from a Colombian hospital and bound for Brazil. Helio Neto, the last surviving soccer player from Chapecoense, discharged on Thursday, nearly 3 weeks on from the devastating air crash that killed nearly 71 people, including the vast majority of his teammates. The 31-year-old taking time to thank medics and volunteers.
I want to thank everyone for your help. I thank God for the work you do. I hope you all continue to do such fantastic work for those who need it, like I did. A big hug for everyone.
Neto is one of only 6 people who survived Lamia Flight 2933, which crashed in Colombia on November 28th, apparently having run out of fuel. He's had leg surgery and is headed back into hospital as soon as he touches down in his home country. But there's a glimmer of hope at the end of his tragic tale. He's expected to make a recovery and may even be able to play professional soccer again.
Wouldn't that be a remarkable recovery? It's 3.5 to 6. The police have busted a large-scale cannabis growing operation based out of expensive rental houses in Auckland. 3 people have been charged with cultivating cannabis in 5 homes in Papakuda and in Howick. Detective Sergeant Kevin Tiernan told our reporter Laura Tupou that the operation would have brought in up to $2 million a year.
Mainly all the bedrooms had been converted into growing cannabis, and it was a very, very good setup.
How many plants did you seize?
So in total, I think we've got something like 520 odd cannabis plants. They're ranging from 300 mils high to 1.5 metres high.
What can you tell me about the areas that these houses were in?
Some of the houses were $1.2, $1.3 million houses, being rented at a rate of about $800 a week. So quite expensive houses, and there's been a bit of damage done to the houses because the people had tampered with the power system and were stealing the power from the power company and bypassing the meter board because of the amount of power that they're using to run their commercial growing operation.
Have you been in touch with the landlords? Like, what's happening in that respect?
Yes, we've contacted all the landlords, and we do have some further inquiries to do with them just to satisfy ourselves that they are not somehow complicit in all this as well. Seems very unusual to me that a landlord renting a house for that value wouldn't be doing regular house inspections. Of course, if they had, they would have walked in on this large growing operation. We still do have some further inquiries to do. I'm not ruling out the possibility that there'll be further charges and even other people charged.
But you're pretty confident that it was only the 6 houses that were involved in this operation? You're not thinking that there might be more?
We think we might have missed one house. One of the things that we did notice is there was no real juvenile plants, and so we're wondering where they might be coming from. It's possible that we've missed a house, but if so, we don't quite know how or where that could be. But yeah, hopefully in the fullness of time, with other investigations, other inquiries that we've got to do, we may even come across another place. Landlords is just one further inquiry that we have to do. There are other things, bank inquiries and phone inquiries and interviewing neighbours and other things, following up on cars that have been seen coming and going to various addresses. So there's quite a number of further inquiries that have to be done.
Detective Senior Sergeant Kevin Tiernan talking to our reporter Laura Tupou about what looked from the pictures like a very healthy cannabis crop, up to $2 million a year. Police estimate it would have produced. It's 30 seconds before 6 o'clock. Coming up after 6 o'clock on Checkpoint, we've got lots actually, because we've shuffled the program around a bit tonight because of that breaking news about the Southern Response class action. But a fascinating interview with Mark Fenwick from Niwa about changes to that coastline in Kaikoura. As we discuss, this is the kind of stuff you read about in history books as having happened long ago, but it is happening in our lifetime. And for people who are able to get to Kaikoura, it's remarkable.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The High Court is allowing a class action against the government-owned insurance company Southern Response to go ahead. Justice Gendell's decision was released today. The lawyer Grant Cameron filed the case on behalf of 47 policyholders who have been battling the insurance company over Canterbury earthquake claims. In his decision, Justice Gendell said the policyholders were making the case that Southern Response had engaged in a deliberate strategy designed to deceive them and deny their claims. He said a reasonable argument had been made that should be properly ventilated and determined by the court. Mr Cameron said he was thrilled with the decision. The court is allowing other policyholders to join the action if they wish, with a deadline of April the 16th next year. Southern Response says it's disappointed by the decision and is considering an appeal. A young Muslim says he was asked to spy on his community by the Security Intelligence Service in exchange for money. The man, whose voice has been changed for his privacy, is in his 20s and is New Zealand born. He says he was called by an SIS officer wanting to meet up, and over several meetings he was offered money in exchange for gathering information at his local mosque.
When they offered me job offers, I sort of didn't turn it down. I sort of dragged it on, which I think maybe if I was abrupt and straightforward with them and sort of shut it down straight away, it would have just been left there and there. I said no to them for several of the job offers that they made, but towards the end, I got the impression that they were sort of starting to harass me.
The man says he has no doubt other Muslims have been approached. A spokesperson for SIS wouldn't say if paid informants were used or if young Muslims were being called, and says the agency doesn't comment on tactics or methods. A senior Democratic senator appears to have confirmed reports that the Russian leader Vladimir Putin was directly involved in efforts to influence the presidential election. On the condition of anonymity, 3 senior American intelligence officials have told the NBC television network that the Russian leader directed how information hacked from the Democratic Party during the election campaign was to be used. Last week, the CIA said Russia had interfered with the election to help President-elect Donald Trump. The outgoing Senate Minority Leader, Harry Reid, was asked if Mr Putin had any involvement.
What I understand, the answer is clearly yes. And his having been former head of the KGB, does that surprise you? And does it surprise anybody today when he denied it?
Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid. Donald Trump has dismissed the claims of Russian hacking to help his campaign as ridiculous. The Corrections Minister says she has been assured that placing out-of-town prison officers working at Mount Eden Prison in a 4.5-star Auckland hotel is the most cost-effective option. Corrections has spent $2 million over 18 months housing staff in central Auckland hotels since it took over the jail from the private operator Serco following the Fight Club scandal. Our political reporter Benedict Collins has more.
The Corrections Minister Judith Collins would not be interviewed, but in a statement she said Corrections had assured her it had explored numerous accommodation ideas and this was the most appropriate option. Mrs Collins ruled out double bunking the Corrections officers to save taxpayers' money. From Parliament, Benedict Collins.
The police investigation into the collapse of the CTV building in the February 2011 earthquake has been completed, but no decision will be made on prosecutions until next year. Detective Superintendent Peter Reid says the investigation is now with the Crown Solicitor and will undergo a further legal review before police make a final decision on any prosecution. He says he's mindful of the length of time the process is taking and the effect this is having on the families of the CTV victims. Mr Reid says he can't put a time frame on when the decision will be announced other than 2017. The decision will be communicated to the families first and then publicly released. Evidence of explosives has been found on human remains from the Egypt air flight that crashed into the Mediterranean in May. Investigators have determined that a fire had broken out in or near the cockpit before it crashed between Crete and the coast of northern Egypt. The ABC's Sarah Bassett reports.
Egypt Air Flight MS-804 plunged into the Mediterranean on its way from Paris to Cairo, killing all 66 people on board. The Egyptian Investigation Committee has issued a statement saying the coroner found traces of explosives on the remains of some victims. The findings suggest the Airbus A320 was brought down by an act of terrorism. The evidence has been sent to prosecutors investigating the tragedy. Audio from the flight recorder of the crashed aircraft mentions a fire on board the plane in its final moments.
Sarah Bassett reporting. It's 6:05. In sport, Team New Zealand have bolstered their sailing ranks by signing 5 times America's Cup winner Murray Jones to help guide them towards next year's event in Bermuda. Jones, who won the Old Mug with Team New Zealand in 1995 and 2000, was identified as one of the key figures behind Oracle Team USA's comeback victory in 2013. The Wellington Phoenix stalwart Vince Lear has thrown his weight behind the A-League club's interim bosses to retain their roles permanently. Chris Greenacre and Des Buckingham stepped in as co-coaches last week after the resignation of Ernie Merrick and guided the side to victory over Central Coast. A win tomorrow against the Western Sydney Wanderers in Auckland would move the Phoenix into the top 6. A permanent appointment is expected before Christmas. A new international athletics series hosted here in New Zealand next February will see the country's stars from the Rio Olympics up against some of the world's top athletes. Men's shot put bronze medalist Tom Walsh, women's bronze medal pole vaulter Eliza McCartney and double Paralympic champion Liam Malone will all be in action around the country. Walsh will take on Olympic shot put champion American Ryan Krauser in Christchurch, while McCartney will trade the track for the train station when she vaults in Britamart's atrium in downtown Auckland. Malone will compete in the men's 400-metre race against able-bodied athletes. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, David Shearer quits Mount Albert for South Sudan. Musician, broadcaster and writer Nick Bollinger talks about his memoir, Gonville. And Eli Kent explains the attraction of a play written 150 years ago, Ibsen's Peer Gynt. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow for all of the North Island. Fine, apart from cloudy areas in the west tomorrow, mainly morning and evening. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine today and tomorrow. Buller and Westland, cloudy periods with isolated showers until tomorrow morning. Cloud increasing tomorrow evening. Fiordland, cloudy periods, cloudy at times with a few showers turning to rain tomorrow night. Southland and Otago, fine spells with isolated showers this afternoon. Cloud increasing later tomorrow. Westerly gales about coastal Southland and Clutha until tonight. And the Chatham Islands, occasional showers with southwest gales tomorrow morning. It is coming up to 6:08, and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten.
Thank you, John Campbell.
Thank you. Why do people on the telly and stuff have mugs? What? Because you can't see what's in them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I can imagine what's in that.
Yeah, well, it's a Friday night, so anything is possible. Anyway, we've got 22 minutes to go, and we're going to begin in Kaikoura. And the inland road to the town will be open for unrestricted use on Monday for the first time since the quake nearly 5 weeks ago. This is very good news, obviously, for Kaikoura. There will be speed restrictions and traffic control in place as work is still continuing on many parts of Route 70, but anything is welcome for a tourist town that can't get tourists. Meanwhile, crews are continuing to work on clearing State Highway 1 south of Kaikoura following yesterday's announcement that up to $2 billion will be spent reinstating the State Highway coastal route. Obviously south from Picton to Kaikoura and then south from Kaikoura to Christchurch. There is some belief that the road south, State Highway 1 south, can be open within the next couple of weeks. That would be a remarkable achievement. Now, one person who's amazed at the changes to that coastline is Niwa marine ecology technician Mark Fenwick. He travelled there to see how the quake affected the region's crayfish and took some striking photos, which you can see if you're watching online or on Freeview Channel 50. But if you're listening, I asked Mark Fenwick just how extraordinary those changes are.
Well, the easiest way to describe it is, when I arrived on the beach down there on the very first day, we went down to do a briefing with fishermen that were going to take part in the survey. And I thought, well, I'm here, I might as well go and have a look at the beach. And I went to the beach, and it's like nothing I've ever seen in my lifetime. And I got the camera out and walked around and took photos, and then I thought, well, I've got to take lots and lots of photos because I'll never see anything like this again in my lifetime.
And what were you seeing?
So, basically, the reef and rocks that were under the water prior to the earthquake were sticking out, over my head height. And when I say sticking out, I mean the bull kelp holdfasts on some of the rocks were actually over my head out of the water. So you can imagine that there's a lot of water gone, or the seabed has raised up considerably. And you sort of get the feeling initially that, well, I better be careful here because the water might come back. But after spending, 12 days down there, you realise the water's not coming back anytime soon, unless something catastrophic happens.
So this is the kind of stuff that I remember from not very good books at school, a kind of description of stuff that took place long before we were here and formed the earth, right, that we live in. But in fact, it's happening now. And do you think we've sort of comprehended the magnitude of this?
It's so difficult to get your head around. Even having been to Ward and seen what's happened there, we must be of a certain age because I cast my mind back to the Napier earthquake and pictures that I'd seen in books of that, and thought, that's one thing, a black and white photo in a book. To actually be on the ground and see the damage, it's just amazing.
Yeah, it's nice of you to say we're of a certain age. I'm a lot older than you, Mark, but you're a very kind guest, and you're welcome back on Checkpoint anytime. Let's talk about the crayfish, because crayfish are interestingly adaptable, aren't they? They can do the shallows and they can go out quite deep. And so have they survived relatively intact?
I can really only say from what I observed, and we saw plenty of crayfish. I think they're probably fine, but that's only an opinion. What we did for MPI was collect numbers, and it's the numbers that they need to work out what really has gone on. And it may be that we've got to do a couple of surveys to figure it all out. It's a very complex question. You have to imagine that the territory or the spaces where the crayfish live must have changed dramatically.
Yeah. Sorry, forgive me, this is such an ignorant question. Do crayfish have a home? Do they return to the same gap in the rocks every evening?
You would think so, but they do move around a lot. They go backwards and forwards looking for food and for mating and for various other biological reasons. So they're pretty mobile.
Okay, so it's not like they're swimming along thinking, hold on a sec, where's number 52? It's left, it's not there anymore. Exactly. But their habitat has completely, at the shallower end, disappeared without trace.
Yes, and there's no other way to describe it. It's a sea change for them, if you excuse the pun. And the chaos that must have gone on when that actually happened would have been amazing to see. It's just one of those things that it happened in the middle of the night. But I said before that there was this sort of fear in me that the sea was going to come back at some point, and it didn't really leave me. Even when we were traipsing around on the rocks, there's a few images there of us on a bit of a rock platform. And it was quite a nervy thing, because you think, if this has lifted up, it could always go the other way. But the geologists tell us that the entire sort of east coast is a bit prone to this uplift. So in the short term, it's a bizarre thing, but in the long term, it probably isn't.
And in the long term, that's the coastline now.
Exactly. And all those years of fishing, this is these guys' livelihoods. All that experience and knowing where to set pots and knowing where the crayfish are at certain times of the year, that's all likely to change while they wait for the habitat to come back.
Mark Fenwick from NIWA, and if you want to see Mark's pictures, they are available with that interview when we put it online. It's really striking what Mark has recorded. Let's go to Aleppo. We've been there earlier tonight, but for those of you who were just tuning in, thousands of people have been evacuated in buses and ambulances from the besieged rebel-held enclave in the east of the city. The Red Cross says the full evacuation of civilians and rebels is likely to take several days. Syrian government forces, backed by Russia, of course, took nearly all remaining rebel-held parts of Aleppo this week in a major victory for the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. The evacuees are being transferred to rebel-held Idlib province. CNN's Fred Pletchen reports.
Finally, a journey to safety. A fleet of buses and ambulances carrying thousands of fighters and civilians from Aleppo's last rebel enclave to other areas held by the opposition. Many glad to be heading to safety, but also bitter to have to leave.
We wanted the free Syria. No one stood by us. No one helped. And like you see now, we are forced to leave our country, our home, Syria.
The evacuation, negotiated by Russia, Turkey, and Iran, got off to a tragic start. Pro-government fighters apparently opening fire on the first set of vehicles. This video obtained by Britain's Channel 4 TV.
Now we are hearing sounds of weapons. We don't know what's happened now.
The evacuation is set to mark the end of the opposition's presence in Aleppo. Bashar al-Assad's government poised to regain full control.
The people of Aleppo, with their resilience, the Syrian Arab army with their courage and sacrifice, and every Syrian citizen who stood with Aleppo and their country and homeland. I just wanted to affirm that today, history is being written.
And it comes after weeks of violence, so bad many felt they could no longer hold out, simply trying to survive.
Me and my children together, that is my final dream.
Aid workers say many of those being evacuated from eastern Aleppo are in some of the worst condition they've ever seen human beings in. And while those leaving Aleppo may have escaped with their lives, they move into an uncertain future, having left their homes and their city, evacuated to another part of Syria where the war is still raging.
That report from CNN. Back in New Zealand, a plea has gone out for the government to take in some of the refugees desperately fleeing Aleppo, as you heard described in that report. Amnesty International is among those urging the government to offer some of them a peaceful home. Rowan Quinn reports.
Those fleeing East Aleppo have endured more than 5 years of war, with much of the city in ruins and food and medical help in short supply. Chances to leave in large numbers have been rare. Now that people are able to escape, Amnesty International's New Zealand director, Grant Baildon, says it's time for the government to step up.
The government, when it reviewed the New Zealand refugee quota, said it wanted to leave spaces aside or places for emergencies. Well, if there's not an emergency going on in the world right now, when will there be?
New Zealand increased its annual refugee quota this year to 1,000, with 250 of those classed as emergency places. Mr Baildon says New Zealand's been doing a good job in the UN Security Council trying to advocate for those caught up in the conflict, but it needs to open its borders.
We've been saying to the government that moving from 1,000 to 1,500 is really the next minimum credible step. For permanent quota, clearly the government could do much more over and above that for an emergency quota. Other countries have done far more, even on a per capita basis than New Zealand. There's no reason the New Zealand government can't step up.
A New Zealand Syrian, Tarek Al-Deri, says the Syrian community's been working hard to fundraise for those caught up in the fighting, and it's hard to hear the latest news from Aleppo.
You can't feel, nothing but despair, and you feel really helpless. But at the same time, we can still do a lot more.
He says New Zealand's done a phenomenal job with the Syrian refugees so far, and it would be a huge help to do more. But he says that's a band-aid, and for real change to take place, the government needs to put political pressure on Russia, Iran and the Syrian regime to negotiate for peace. The New Zealand Federation of Islamic Associations also wants New Zealand to step up diplomatic pressure, and it's asking New Zealanders to help where they can by donating to humanitarian agencies working in the area. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
90 minutes past 6 on a Friday night. A shot across the bow of the Old Boys network is how one small real estate agency is describing the penalties handed down to 4 of the country's biggest players for price fixing and anti-competitive behaviour. Late last year, the Commerce Commission took action against Barfoot and Thompson, Harcourt's LJ Hooker and Ray White after they reached a deal on how to respond to changes to Trade Me's property listing fees. Together, the companies agreed to pass on the cost of listing the online auction to vendors. On the online auction site to vendors. Sarah Robson takes a look at some of the implications of today's decisions.
In the Auckland High Court today, a judge ordered the 4 agencies to pay almost $10 million in penalties for their actions. The head of the real estate firm 200 Square, Grant Wakelin, says the decision is good news for smaller players in the industry.
If the traditional industry actually takes notice of it and changes the way they work, it's great for newer entrants into the industry, because it says the Old Boys networks, the way of doing business in the past, is not going to be allowed into the future. They can't act in concert.
Grant Wakelin says it's difficult for new entrants to get a foothold in the real estate industry and do something different, because there's always been pushback from the bigger companies.
It's really hard being an independent business, doing something new in real estate and trying to change the way the industry works, trying to change consumer behaviour. It's really hard to get traction in there. Hopefully this will help level the playing field.
Hive News publisher and economic commentator Bernard Hickey says while it's not clear that people selling their houses lost out as a result of the deal, it's clear that agencies were engaging in price fixing and anti-competitive behaviour. But he says whether they're doing this in other areas is difficult to prove.
Until you see evidence that's put before a court and a court rules on it, it's hard to say. But what we do know is that the cost of selling a property in New Zealand is significantly higher as a proportion of the value of the home than it is in other countries. And many people argue that's because the cost of real estate advertising is significantly higher here than in other countries.
Bernard Hickey says unlike other countries, much of the money spent on real estate advertising in New Zealand still goes to print rather than online. He says it's hard to say whether that's because of anti-competitive behaviour, industry practices, or a belief by those selling that they get better value in print.
It's a question for those in the industry to think about, and for vendors, so people who are selling their homes, to think about. Are they actually getting much value by putting a big juicy colour ad in the newspaper or in the property press when they could get just as much action and price by putting their ad online?
Neither Trade Me nor the Real Estate Institute would comment on the penalties that have been handed down. For Checkpoint, Sarah Robson, Aho.
The Treaty Negotiations Minister has made another attempt to get disputing Ngāpuhi Hapu back on track for a settlement claim. Tū Horonuku, the troubled mandated iwi authority, and Te Kotahihatanga, a group representing a large group of Hapu, had separate meetings with Chris Finlayson in Auckland this afternoon. Now, Mr Finlayson told both sides they must attend a meeting in January, which he will chair. Earlier this year, Tū Horonuku members, Te Kotahihatanga representatives and the Office of Treaty Settlements formed a new working group, which the government accepted as the new joint authority. So far, so good. But Tū Horonuku members didn't turn up to the meetings. Our Māori Issues correspondent, Mihi Narangi Forbes, spoke to Chris Finlayson a short time ago.
We're going to see what we can do to implement Maranga Mai as quickly as possible. They recognise with me the huge importance of getting on with the job, and they've given me their unwavering commitment that they will attend the meeting on the 13th of January, which is what I wanted.
Were you disappointed that they haven't turned up to these Maranga Mai transition meetings?
Look, I don't want to get into all that. I'm very pleased they are coming to a meeting with me on the 13th of January.
Is this their last chance?
I'm not into last chances because they have said they will come to a meeting with me on the 13th of January, and I do apologise for snapping at you earlier when you asked me that question 4 times, and I congratulate you on your persistence, but I am very, very focused on getting Maranga Mai implemented.
And is the August deadline still on track?
I believe that if people, to use the colloquial, I was going to say pull their fingers out, but get on with things, I think that we can achieve good stuff next year.
Chris Finlayson speaking to Mihi Narangi Forbes, to whom he also apologised for snapping, which was very nice of him. He must have been hanging with Jerry Brownlee. It's 24 minutes past 6. The Obama administration has suggested that Russian President Vladimir Putin personally authorised the hacking of Democratic officials' email accounts in the run-up to the presidential election, and said it was fact that hacking had helped Donald Trump's campaign. The White House has also assailed President-elect Trump himself, saying he must have known of Russia's interference. In fact, Hillary Clinton raised it at one of the debates, didn't she? And President Obama is pointing the finger directly at Russian President Vladimir Putin. Here's the BBC's excellent Laura Bicker.
Thank you to the incredible people of Pennsylvania. Thank you. Thank you.
The president-elect is defiant. As he tours the country to thank voters, he's dismissing claims that Vladimir Putin helped put him in the White House. In a tweet, he said if Russia or some other entity was hacking, why did the White House wait so long to act? Why did they only complain after Hillary lost? But the Obama administration made Russian hacking claims public several months ago. Now they say the Russian president was directly involved in the operation, which targeted the emails of Hillary Clinton's closest aides. Mr. Obama gave this response to NPR Radio.
I think there is no doubt that when any foreign government tries to impact the integrity of our elections, that we need to take action. And we will, at a time and place of our own choosing.
That is a statement from
Earlier, the White House press secretary pointed a finger at Mr. Putin.
Based on my personal reading, and not based on any knowledge that I have that may be classified or otherwise, it's pretty obvious that they were referring to the senior-most government official in Russia.
Vladimir Putin has always denied the accusations and said they were laughable nonsense. No proof has ever been made public, but many within the intelligence community are convinced of Russia's involvement.
I would put this in the win column as one of the most successful covert action, covert influence programs in the history of covert influence programs. At a minimum, what we now have is the President-elect of the United States condemning, criticizing, refusing to accept, pick your package, the word of the American intelligence community, and siding with the word of the Russian president.
But Mr. Trump's supporters say this is a ploy to discredit him.
This is almost the CIA, people in the intelligence community using disinformation tactics against the President-elect of the United States, and that is just disgraceful.
The dispute over Russia's role in the election is overshadowing Mr. Trump's transition. The president-elect and the president do not agree on who is responsible or how to act.
Laura Bicker from the BBC. To millions, Edinburgh's spectacular Hogmanay fireworks are a crucial way of seeing in the new year with a bit of a bang. But councillors in the city have agreed to consider whether to follow in the footsteps of Disneyland Paris and introduce silent pyrotechnics. This follows noise complaints from local residents, especially pet owners. Steve Godden has more from the Scottish capital.
They are the centrepiece of Edinburgh's Hogmanay celebrations, but imagine the midnight fireworks with the sound turned down. Not a good idea, say event organisers. Think of the thousands of visitors and the millions watching on TV, they argue. But a city councillor takes a different view, which she's asking elected colleagues to consider. What about the residents who have to put up with the noise? And if Disneyland Paris can switch to low-noise fireworks, then why not Scotland's capital? In the shadow of Edinburgh Castle, there were mixed views.
I think you should keep your fireworks as they are. They're absolutely beautiful.
I think the whole point of fireworks are to be noisy and kind of visual, so don't really know why anyone would want to go to a silent fireworks display.
For the pets and things like that, silent, if they can do silent fireworks, I think that would be a good idea.
Luna does not like fireworks at all. She gets really nervous.
With firework displays dotted throughout the calendar, Edinburgh Council has agreed to consider their impact. A report is expected in the spring. Before then, a global audience will once again witness the sound and fury of an Edinburgh Hogmanay, undimmed, for now at least.
That's BBC's Steve Godden from Edinburgh. An excellent text has come in from Dave Hughes in Newmarket. Morning Report, Phil Pennington broke the story this morning of the correction staff who have been put up in a four-star hotel. Checkpoint has broken the story this week of emergency housing being provided for people who would otherwise be homeless at $2,300 a week. And Dave Hughes from Newmarket has asked, well, how come one branch of the government can negotiate a $200 rate per night for a four-star hotel, and another branch of the government negates a $350 a night rate for a much less good hotel? And we think that's a very good question. So, yeah, he used a word that I think that might be a bit pejorative, but yeah, he was fairly accurate in his description of the aforementioned $350 a night premise. Certainly you wouldn't go there on your honeymoon. Next week, Rowan Quinn will be here presenting the news of the day, and we will be looking back on the year 2016. Have a wonderful weekend. See you Monday.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The High Court is allowing a class action against the government-owned insurance company Southern Response over Canterbury earthquake claims to go ahead. Meanwhile, the police investigation into the collapse of the CTV building in the February 2011 earthquake has been completed, but no decision will be made on prosecutions until next year. The Russian Defence Ministry says more than 6,000 people have quit East Aleppo in the past 24 hours, including 3,000 rebels. A young Muslim in New Zealand says he was asked to spy on his community by the Security Intelligence Service in exchange for money. A senior Democratic senator appears to have confirmed reports the Russian leader Vladimir Putin was directly involved in efforts to influence the presidential election. And the Corrections Minister says she's been assured that placing out-of-town prison officers working at Mount Eden Prison in a 4.5-star